سيئات أعمالنا من يهد الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلله فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن سيدنا ونبينا وحبيبنا وسندنا ومولانا محمدا عبده ورسوله. قال الله تعالى في القرآن المجيد والفرقان الحميد: من يتكفل لي بما بين لحييه ورجليه أتكفل له بالجنة. وسئل عن أكثر ما يدخل الناس النار فقال الأجوفان الفم والفرج. Nabi Kareem sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he says in a hadith, before that I said something else, going off on tangent there. So, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Brothers and sisters, welcome to the third lecture of Imam Ghazali's Muhlakat, those things that annihilate a person spiritually, which is a summary of a particular section from his Ihya al-Muddin, his Revival of Islamic Sciences, in which Imam Ghazali, his magnum opus, 10 volumes, which was then condensed into one short volume known as Al-Arba'in fi Usul al-Din, the 40 principles of religion. And within that, Imam Ghazali rahmatullah alayh, he has a section where he discusses the muhlakat, those things that destroy a person spiritually. He says there are lots of things that destroy a person, but one thing specifically that destroys a person, he condenses these into 10 key things. So the first lecture we covered an introduction about Imam Ghazali rahmatullah alayh. We mentioned a bit about his lifestyle, about his life, and the spiritual crisis that he went through, which is very important because everybody needs to realize that we all go through ups and downs. He also went through an up and down in his time over nearly 1,000 years ago, and he went off on a journey where he discovered himself and he made a connection with Allah Almighty. And then he wrote his book Ihya al-Muddin. And in there, in the 10th section where he talks about those things that destroy a person, the first of the 10 points he mentions is eating too much. And we mentioned that there's a domino effect with that. As a person eats too much, or he fulfills his carnal self in terms of his stomach, then bit by bit, number of other spiritual illnesses start feeding into that. And they all come in like a domino effect. So the second point, or the second spiritual illness, or the second annihilator, muhlakat, which he describes as, he calls it sharihil kalam, in speaking too much. Speaking too much, being chatty, gobby, or gobby. Loquacious comes from Latin. The word loci means to speak, and it describes a person who's got a lot to say. Yeah, often in a negative way. So it's more precise than the word talkative. You can be talkative, but you're speaking too much in a negative fashion. And this is what the second point is. And he begins and he says, وَذَلِكَ لَا بُدَّ مِنْ قَطْعِهِ. He comes out, Imam Ghazali rahmatullah, he speaks to the heart and he says it's necessary to cut the tongue out. Because some of the translators might be able to translate it literally, and he cut the tongue out totally, or to cut it speaking too much. Why? The reason why he says that the tongue has such a deep impact on a person spiritually is because all of the limbs affect the heart. That the heart, Allah Almighty says in the Quran Kareem that the person who has a sound heart will enter Jannah. Yeah? All of the limbs have an effect and impact on the heart. However, the tongue itself is the ambassador of the heart. It has a special situation. It's special and it's different in that when a person speaks, what he says actually reflects onto his heart immediately. So Imam Ghazali rahmatullah, and he goes into a lot of discussion. It's about 15 pages, but I don't think I can summarize 15 pages into 30 minutes or 25 minutes. So I'm just going to quickly run through it very quickly. So he says that when a person is a liar, then this impacts the heart and the heart becomes crooked. This is even more the case when there's some frivolous talk included in that, then the heart becomes black. And being someone who speaks too much, it blackens the heart even more. And then he mentions a number of hadith, or the sayings of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He says that Nabi Kareem sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, عظم رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم أمر اللسان, that Nabi Kareem sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he really gave stress to the situation or the condition of the tongue. He said, من يتكفل لي بما بين لحييه ورجليه أتكفل له بالجنة, that the person who gives me a guarantee for what's between his jaws and his private parts, أتكفل له بالجنة, I shall guarantee for him paradise. Yeah, because the tongue is pretty easy. it's a little piece of flesh, piece of meat there. You just say something, you could do anything with it. وَسُئِلَ نَكْثَرِ مَا يَدْخُلُ النَّاسَ النَّارِ. Nabi Karim Sallallahu was asked in a hadith that what was the greatest thing, or the most thing on account of which people will enter the fire of Jahannam. Nabi Karim Sallallahu he said, Al-Ajwafan, Al-Fam wal-Faraj. He said the two empty things, yani the mouth and the private parts. Nabi Karim Sallallahu said, وَهَلْ يَكُبُّ النَّاسَ عَلَى مَنَاخِرٍ فِي جَهَنَّمْ إِلَّا حَصَائِدُ أَلْسِنَتِهِمْ. That the only thing that will cause people to be thrown into Jahannam face first will be what their tongues harvested, all the bad things that they did. And he's going to go over the different things that a person can do with their tongue. وَقَالَ مَنْ صَمَتَ نَجَى. Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said in another hadith that the person who remains quiet, naja, he has gained salvation. وَقَالَ لَهُ مُعَاذٌ. Mu'adh radiallahu ta'ala, he said to him, أَيُّ الْأَعْمَالِ أَفْضَلَ. Which action is the best? He said, فَأَخْرَجَ لِسَانُهُ. He took out his tongue, وَوَضَعَ عَلَيْهِ يَدَهُ. He placed his hand on it. وَقَالَ إِنَّ أَكْثَرَ خَطَايَ ابْنِ آدَمَ فِي لِسَانِهِ. That the greatest of mistakes and sins that the son of Adam carries out is on account of his tongue. وقال صلى الله عليه وسلم من كان يؤمن بالله واليوم الآخر. That the person who believes in the day of judgment and in Allah and the day of judgment, فَلْيَقُلْ خَيْرًا أَوْ لِيَصْمُتْ. Then let him say something good or stay quiet. And the Prophet also said, "Man katharu kalamuhu kathura saqtuhu." That a person who speaks a lot, then the opportunities for him to slip or make a mistake, increase. That the person who speaks a lot, then the opportunities for him to make a mistake increases. وَمَنْ كَثُرَ سَقْطُهُ كَثُرَتْ ذُنُوبُهُ. And the person who slips quite a lot, كَثُرَتْ ذُنُوبُهُ, then his sins become quite a lot. And whoever sins are great, فَالنَّارُ أَوْلَى بِهِ, then the fire of Jahannam is preferable for him. وَلِهَذَا كَانَ الصِّدِّيقُ رَضِيَ اللَّهُ تَعَالَى عَنْهُ يَضَعُ حَجًّا فِي فِيهِ لِيَمْنَعَ نَفْسَهُ مِنَ الْكَلَامِ. Ghazali then says that it's because of this that Sayyidina Abu Bakr radiallahu ta'ala anhu, at times he would put a piece of stone or a pebble in his mouth to stop himself from speaking too much. Or he used to use a gobstopper. That's why they call it a gobstopper. So anyway, so Imam Ghazali rahmatullah alayhi, he's mentioned that the second point that annihilates a person is the tongue, and then he mentions a number of hadith that lays emphasis or stress on that particular point. And then he moves on and he says that there are 20 afflictions affecting the heart, and then he mentions these in his in a book that he's written, in a section within Ihya al-Muddin known as Kitabu Afat al-Lisan, the book regarding the afflictions of the heart. He mentions that there's a verse of the Quran in which Allah Almighty says, لا خير في كثير من النجوى إلا من أمر بالصدقة أو معروف أو إصلاح بين الناس. That there is no good in much of their conversation except for he who commands charity, good or reconciliation between people. And there's a principle that Imam Ghazali rahmatullah alayh then explains, and this is very important. He says that do not speak about whatever does not concern you. ما لا يعنيه. Don't speak about those things that don't concern you, and limit your speech to what is important. And speak only when necessary. So the definition of what does not concern you, ma la ya'ni, he then defines further. He says, if left, what doesn't concern you means that if you leave it alone, you don't speak on that topic, then you're not going to get any reward. And if you were to even speak and say that thing, then you wouldn't even fulfill any personal need. And he says, if you apply this principle to everything that comes out of your mouth, then automatically you should stop speaking too much, or only speaking about those things that are beneficial. Then he says that whoever limits his speech, to this, and only speaking about those things that are actually beneficial, and if left, then they wouldn't get any benefit from it, then what would happen? The slave, the person will only speak a little. And then he says that the slave should do muhasabah. He should take stock of himself when he mentions something useless. That if he were to do the dhikr of Allah Almighty instead of saying what he said, then he would accumulate a massive treasure from the treasures of happiness. So then he says that how can the mind allow one person to leave a hidden treasure and collect a pile of mud instead? هذا لو لم يكن فيه إثم فإن كان فيه إثم فهو كترك كنز وأخذ شعلة من نار. Then he says that's only the situation when a person speaks about something that doesn't have a sin. But if there's something that's a sinful, and he starts speaking about those things that are sinful, and there's something that is going to be censored in the eyes of Allah Almighty, then in that case, he's not taking a treasure from the treasures of Allah Almighty, he's actually taking a hot ember from the fire of Jahannam. Then he says that what are the afflictions of the tongue? يعني في تفصيل بعض آفات اللسان, what are they? And he says that he asks, you might want to know, لعلك تريد أن تعرف تفصيل بعض هذه الآفات. What are the afflictions? What are the negative aspects of the tongue? And he says that in the main they come down to 20 things, right? But out of the 20 you could probably condense it even further to 5. And he says these are what they are. Number 1, al-kidh, speaking a lie. Al-ghibatu, backbiting. Yeah, speaking ill of other people behind their back, even if it's true. Yeah. Wal-mumarat, arguing. Being very debative. Just debating people for the sake of argumentative. Yeah. Wal-madh, praising people. And he's going to explain why, because people might think, well, I've just praised somebody, what's wrong with that? But it can be wrong at times. Wal-mizah, and also joking. So these are the 5 things. Al-kidh, lying, ghibat, backbiting, mumarat, argumentation, madh, praising, wal-mizah, and also joking. We'll go through the first one. What is lying? So regarding lying, Nabi Karim sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, لا يزال العبد يكذب ويتحرى الكذب حتى يكتب عند الله كذابا. That person lies and he carries on lying until it's written in the eyes of Allah Almighty that this person is a liar. In fact, in one hadith it says, وَيْلٌ لِلَّذِي يُحَدِّثُ فَيَكْذِبُ لِيَضْحَكَ مِنْهُ النَّاسِ وَيْلٌ لَهُ وَيْلٌ لَهُ. He said, destruction and harm be to the person who speaks and then he lies so that the people may laugh. وَيْلٌ لَهُ, destruction to him and destruction to him. So there's a number of hadiths of this case, of this type. Now, what's the ruling of lying? So the Imam Ghazali rahmatullah alayhi says that it's haram in all situations, except when there's a particular need. So lying in general, lying is completely haram, is impermissible, except when there's a particular need. Lying is haram even in the case of the scenario, if a mother was to say to a child, come, I shall give you something, and they do not give something to them, then that's also lying, and that's haram itself. And it's only permissible in certain situations. Yeah? It's only permissible in certain situations, according to the hadith, Nabi Karim sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, ما رخص رسول الله, Kulthum radiallahu ta'ala anha says, the Nabi Karim sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, ما رخص رسول الله sallallahu alayhi wa sallam في شيء من الكذب إلا في ثلاثة. The Prophet didn't give permission to lie except for in 3 situations. Number 1, الرجل يقول القول يريد بالإصلاح. A person says something in order to bring people together. Yeah, there's some dispute, to remove that dispute and bring them together. وَرَجُلْ يَقُولُ الْقَوْلُ فِي الْحَرْبِ. A person says something at a time of war. Why? Because our war is a time when a time of deceit. Al-harbu khida', because of that. وَالرَّجُلُ يُحَدِّثُ إِمْرَأَتَهُ. And a person who speaks to his wife in order to patch things over and correct things. So this is what Imam Ghazali rahmatullah alayhi says. But if a person is forced to lie, then he says that even then you shouldn't try and lie, even in this situation, but try and use, be a little bit economic with the truth, as they say. Yeah, one of the sheikhs, it was a time of colonialism, and there was a warrant for his arrest. He was in hiding somewhere, and then he came to learn that there's a platoon of the army coming in front of him, or they're approaching this place because someone's tipped him off. So he comes out of the place he was hiding, and they come across him. But because he was a sheikh, but he was also one of those individuals who wouldn't dress the way the ulama dressed, in that he wouldn't wear special clothes. He just wear what general ordinary people wore in those days. He wasn't any special, so they just thought he was just a normal laborer. So they asked him a question. He said, do you know where such a sheikh is? So he moved a step forward. He said, yeah, he was just here a little while ago. So he's being a little bit, economical with the truth. He's not lying, but he's misleading them. But this was permissible in that situation. So Imam Ghazali rahmatullah alayhi says that if a person is forced to lie, then fine, but he should do it in a way that he's just using indirect speech, as they say. or being slightly economical with the truth. So that's the first thing, that's the lying. We mentioned that. There's a few others. The second one is al-ghibat. Imam Ghazali rahmatullah alayhi says that al-afatu thani al-ghibatu, that the second afat, or the second thing that afflicts a person through the tongue is backbiting. Nabi Karim sallallahu alayhi wa sallam says, وَلَا يَغْتَبْ بَعْضُكُمْ بَعْضًا أَيُحِبُّ أَحَدُكُمْ أَن يَأْكُلَ لَحْمَ أَخِيهِ مَيْتًا فَكَرِهْتُمُوهُ. And Allah Almighty says that let not one of you or some of you do ghibat of others. Do one of you prefer or like to eat the flesh of his brother who's passed away? Surely you're going to dislike this. Nabi Karim sallallahu alayhi wa sallam says in another hadith, al-ghibatu ashaddu min az-zina, that ghibat, backbiting, is worse than zina. So the definition of ghibat is, as the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam explains, he says, in fact there's another hadith, he says, مررت ليلة أسري بي على قوم يخمشون وجوم بأصفارهم. That on the night of Mi'raj, when he went into the heavens, I went past the people يخمشون وجوم بأصفارهم, who were scratching their faces with their nails. قلت من هؤلاء? He said, who are these people? فقيل لي, they were said to me, هؤلاء الذين يغتابون الناس. These are the people who used to do ghibat or backbite other people. But what is the definition of ghibat? أن حد الغيبة, what is it? Nabi Karim sallallahu alayhi wa sallam explains this. He said, أن تذكر أخاك بما يكرهه لو بلغه وإن كنت صادقا سواء ذكرت نقصانا في نفسي أو أكلي أو صوبي أو فعلي أو قولي أو نسبه أو داري أو دابتي أو شيء مما يتعلق به حتى قولك إنه واسع الكم أو طويل الذيل حتى ذكر عند رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم رجل فقيل ما عجزه وقال اغتبتموه. So the definition of ghibat is that, as the Prophet ﷺ explains, that you mention your brother that which he would dislike if it were to reach him, even if it's the truth. Imam Ghazali says this regardless of whether there's deficiency in his self, in his body, actual body, his mind, his clothes, action, speech, lineage, home, his mount, or anything associated with him. So that's what Imam Ghazali rahmatullah alayhi says. To the extent that a person was mentioned in front of Nabi Karim sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he said that, you know, how short is this person? And the Prophet in a negative way, the Prophet said that you just backbited him. So that's where backbiting comes. Now, ghibat of the ulama. Imam Ghazali then has a very interesting section after that. This is very interesting because when he says the ulama, means the educated people, and sometimes, you know, we're very careful not to do ghibat, but then we might do ghibat of people in a bit of a indirect way. Yeah. And Imam Ghazali rahmatullah alayhi, again, time and again in Zihal-Muddin, he mentions this. So I'll go over this. He says that the worst type of ghibat is the ghibat of the learned people. Yeah. So how do the learned people do ghibat? And the religious people. Yeah. So they do ghibat in a different way, and then they consider themselves to be pious. For example, they might say something like, he gives an example, Alhamdulillah. One person turns around and says, Alhamdulillah, all praise to Allah Almighty. الذي لم يبتلنا بالدخول على السلطان لطلب الدنيا. So you know, in his time, you've got all these different states, Islamic states, you've got princes, and you have people who want to curry favor with the royalty, rub shoulders in order to gain some sort of financial, there's a financial incentive behind this. Yeah. So they might like become friends with them, or they'll go there and they'll praise them. And then there'll be other ulama who will say, you know, we don't want to be scholars for dollars, as they say. We want to remain completely independent. And then they see one of the shuyukhs or one of the alims is going around meeting the princes, etc. And then they might turn around, and these ulama who might frown on that, and they might turn around and say something like this: Alhamdulillah, alladhi, all praise be to Allah, who hasn't tested us by entering upon the sultan in order to gain some dunya. Yeah. So basically indicating that, oh, you know, look, that's such a person, look what he's doing. But they're shrouding, or they're clothing their criticism of this person in the clothing of religiosity. Yeah. Another example, he says, "Na'udhu billah min qillatil haya." They might say something like, oh, you know, we seek refuge from the lack of shame in people nowadays. Yeah. وَهُمْ يَفْحَمُونَ الْمَقْصُودِ بِذَلِكَ. And he's like he's winking, we're talking about such a person, look what they're up to right now. But you're actually doing the ghibat, he's saying. ويقول ما أحسن أحوال فلان لولا أنه بلي بمثل ما بلي به أمثالنا وهو قلة الصبر عن الدنيا فنسأل الله تعالى أن يعافينا وغرض بذلك الغيبة. He gives another example. Someone might turn and say, how great is such a person, such a nice person. But even better if he wasn't afflicted with that which our type of people aren't afflicted with. And that's, dunya. He's just running after dunya all the time. We ask Allah Almighty to save us from this. They use a religious language, to shroud or hide their ghibat. So Imam Ghazali rahmatullah, he says that this is the worst type of ghibat itself. And it's not just confined to the scholars, but it's confined to religious people. Because,
Wouldn't you say that is very common right now, especially with...
I don't want to point fingers at anyone. But I think, let's look at introspection. Each individual should look at themselves. That's because the change happens with the individual. That's my view. So, there's a lot of things that happen. And that's why, there's a negligence. People aren't focusing on these things anymore. The rituality is there. The rituals are there, but the spirituality or the spiritual aspect of the deen is disappearing. Or it's not there. But then every now and again, we need to have a bit of a reality check and come back to what's correct. So what's happening outside there, we know what's happening, but let's ourselves focus on ourselves. Because at the end of the day, يَوْمَ يَفِرُّ الْمَرْءُ مِنْ أَخِيهِ وَأُمِّهِ وَأَبِيهِ وَصَاحِبَتِهِ وَبَنِيهِ. That on the day of judgment, everyone's going to run away from each other. It's all about themselves. But it was there 1,000 years ago. Ghazali mentioned it. It's happening today. And we might come across it, but we've got to be careful. How do we, if we're in a majlis and that happens, stick your fingers in your ears and walk off. It's the easiest way. Why do you want to ruin your akhirah for that? But it's happening. So, he considers this to be the novel ways of doing ghibat. وَكَذَلِكَ he comes out with another one. There's another one. Let me just come up with this one. وَكَذَلِكَ قَدْ يَقُولُ. Sometimes people say دَعْ غِيبَةَ النَّاسِ وَهُوَ بِقَلْبِهِ غَيْرُ كَارٍ لِغِيبَتِهِ. Astaghfirullah. I address myself here. He says that sometimes we might say to people, stop doing ghibat. But then, in his heart, he doesn't dislike ghibat himself. Yeah? إِنَّمَا غَرْزُهُ أَن يُعْرَفَ بِالتَّوَرُّعِ. But his purpose is only, he's giving da'wah towards abandoning ghibat. But his purpose is only so that people turn around and call him pious. But he's not. So he's continuously, Mahfuz, he's continuously addressing the ulama, the shuyukhs, in his book. He's telling them, sort yourselves out first before talking to other people. وَذَلِكَ لَا يَخْرُجُ عَنْ إِثْمِ الْغِيبَةِ مَا لَمْ يَكْرَحَ بِقَلْبِهِ. That the only thing that will take him away from the sin of ghibat is to dislike it from his heart and recognize it. Because a lot of times we don't recognize it. We ignore it. We turn a blind eyes to it. فَالْغِيبَةُ بِالْقَلْبِ حَرَامٌ كَمَا أَنَّ بِاللِّسَانِ حَرَامٌ إِلَّا أَنْ يُضْطَرَ إِلَى مَعْرِفَةِ. We'll leave that out. That's fine. Now, occasions when ghibat can be permissible. So sometimes it might be permissible. There might be a situation where you might need to tell somebody about another person's character in a measured way, to forewarn them due to a reason, for example. Yeah? But that's not a license to go around doing ghibat about everyone, all and sundry, all the time. He says, number one, there's 6 situations. Number one, for the oppressed to mention the oppression of the oppressor to someone who can deal with it, such as a sultan. Yeah? To mention the oppression of an oppressor to someone who can actually deal with it. But you're not going around, telling your friends because, this is what this person did. Yeah? But that person is not going to affect any change. But you're actually going to someone who's going to affect the change. Number 2, mentioning it to someone from whom assistance is sought in tackling it or changing an evil. Yeah? So you might go to the police, for example. Or you might tell someone responsible inside your madrasa that this is happening, you need to address it. Or in the masjid, or in the university, etc. Number 3, you're asking a question regarding fiqh to an expert in fiqh. Yeah, you need an answer on fiqh. So you go to the faqih or the mufti and you ask him a question. In that scenario, you will be able to mention something. Or you might want to warn a Muslim about the evil of another person. And only in the situation where you know that the person who you're telling is actually, if he wasn't informed or she wasn't informed, they will be negatively affected by that other person. So for example, there's a marriage proposal and, someone's come to X and asked them, like, can you tell me about such a person? So for you to not disclose at that time would be incorrect. Rather, it's actually preferable if you told them the truth at that time. So it would be permissible in that situation. Number 5, when a person is known, or there might be a business scenario. So someone's going around and he's trying to crowdfund something, but he's one of those individuals who crowdfunds and then disappears with people's money. So in that situation, again, you're allowed to tell them about the person's character. Number 5, when a person is known by a name in which there's a deficiency, so it's actually his proper noun. It's not a common noun. You're not calling him an idiot, but idiot's actually his name. For example, or it might be something like, there's a famous Mongol warlord or king, sultan, Tamerlane or Tamerlung. His Tamer, his name was Timur, and because he was unable to walk properly. He was in Farsi they called it Langra, as in he's lame. Timur, so his name became Timur the lame. That became his proper name. So if his name is actually that, and he didn't mind being called Tamerlane, I don't think you want to laugh in his face as well, by the way, because he was a sultan, but not only was he a sultan, he was actually a very he was a very difficult individual as well. He really oppressed people to the next level. So if his name is that, like Tamerlung, his name was, which was translated into English as Tamerlane, then that's fine. And then the 6th situation is when a person is open with their own faults. He doesn't dislike his faults being mentioned. But remember that mentioning a sin is an act of disobedience that he conceals and would dislike being mentioned isn't permissible without an excuse. So this is everything regarding ghibat. But how do you abstain from ghibat? So Imam Ghazali rahmatullah alayhi says that the way to abstain from ghibat is very simple. He says that he gives 4 things. Number 1, he says meditate over the hadith. Al-ghibat is faster in consuming the good deeds of a slave than in al-ghibata asraw fi hasanat al-abd min an-nar fil yabas. That meditate over this hadith, within which Nabi Karim sallallahu alaihi wasallam says that ghibat is quicker in burning the pious deeds of a slave than the fire burns dry wood. I think we go to Allah Almighty on the Day of Judgment. We've all got amal. But then when we present ourselves in front of Allah Almighty, and then the hisab and the kitab takes place. And on that day we might have sworn at somebody, or we might have spoken bad about people. And on that day you will not be able to recompense them with financial incentives or a nice word. But the currency of the day will be one's own pious actions. And you'll be giving your pious actions to all these people, and in exchange, when you finish your pious actions, then you've got to take their misdeeds onto your hisab, into your book. So if you meditate on that, in which Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam says that the ghibat is quicker in burning a person's pious deeds than fire burns dry wood. It consumes it. Then that will inshallah help. Number 2, he says that meditating that the good deeds of the backbiter goes to the account of the person who's backbiting. And just think about one's deeds. How many good deeds do we have? And even the deeds that we have, are they of the value that they're accepted in front of Allah Almighty? That's the question. Number 3, let him look at his own faults rather than the faults of others. His own faults should preoccupy him from the faults of others. If he's committed a minor sin, then understand that the harm from his minor sin is greater than the harms of other people's major sins. Think about your own minor sins. If he has no faults, then Imam Ghazali says, let him understand that his ignorance of his own faults is the greatest fault. The ignorance of his own faults is the greatest fault. So when can a person not have any faults? Everyone's got faults. And if he absolutely does not have any faults, he's some special type of wali of Allah, a very pious person, then let him thank Allah rather than speak bad about other people. So that's the third thing. And the fourth thing, if he does ghibat, then he should do istighfar and ask for forgiveness to Allah Almighty. He should also ask forgiveness from the person he's spoken ill of. If he doesn't meet him, then let him greatly praise him, pray for him, carry out good actions. And if his good deeds are moved over to the account of the person who's backbited, then let him also increase his own good deeds, so he's actually got something to go to Allah Almighty with. You know, one of the Mashaykh said that, it's not just about carrying out pious deeds. Dunya isn't just about carrying out pious deeds. But dunya, there's an aspect of dunya, in addition to that, is carrying out your pious deeds, and then with your pious deeds, taking that into the next world where it's actually beneficial. And the only way you can take that in the next world is ensure that it's not consumed by taking the hukuk of other people, the rights of other people. The third point that Imam Ghazali rahmatullah alayhi mentions, the third afat or the thing that afflicts a person spiritually is argumentation, mu'amarat. And he says that this is unnecessary argumentation. Nabi Karim sallallahu alayhi wasallam says in a hadith, "Man taraka al-bira'a wa muhikkud," that person who leaves an argument when he's in the right, something's wrong's happened, you leave it even though you know you're right. Buniya lahu baytun fi al-jannah, that a house shall be made for him in the highest level of Jannah. And he's right, but he just leaves it for the sake of peace. Wa man tarakahu mubtil, and the person who leaves it and he knows he's wrong, but he just leaves it for the sake of leaving it. Yeah, he knows he's wrong. He shouldn't be arguing in the first place, but he leaves it. Something he realizes. Buniya lahu, even he gets something. Buniya lahu baytun fi rabad al-jannah. He's given a house on the peripherals of Jannah. So it's a win-win situation, both ways. وقال صلى الله وهذا لأن الترك على المحق أشد. Why? Because leaving, the reason why the other person is also getting a house, because leaving an argument is difficult. But you're breaking your nafs and you're abandoning it. Nabi Karim sallallahu alayhi wa sallam says, لا يستكمل العبد حقيقة الإيمان حتى يدع المراء ومحق. That person will not reach or complete the reality of his iman until he or she leaves argumentation in the situation when he's right. So he's got every right to argue and debate this issue and get his haqq, but he lets it go. He completely lets it go. Then Imam Ghazali rahmatullah alayhi says that the cause, the definition of arguing, so opposing another's speech by pointing out the mistakes in it, explicitly or implicitly. That's what he defines it. Opposing the speech of another person by pointing out mistakes in it. Yes, there's fault in it. Explicitly or implicitly, this is what's defined as argumentation. And then he says, what causes people to argue with others? He says, number one is due to pride, because the person wants to show himself big. Yeah, he wants to keep face value. That's number two, to silence the others. And he says that Imam Ghazali rahmatullah alayhi says that when a person is very argumentative, then these 2 points, the pride in himself, and the second thing is the haughtiness to silence the others becomes strong, and then he comes to a level that it destroys a person spiritually. And he says, wajib to stop this, completely compulsory, stop it. How do you stop it? He gives the remedy. He says the remedy is you accept the truth. You completely accept the truth. What is wrong? Then what is wrong. Then remain quiet. Yeah? Remain quiet unless there's a religious benefit. And even if you need to advise someone, then do it with some wisdom, some softness, some gentleness. The fourth afat of the heart is al-mizah, which is joking. I'll quickly run through this. Imam Ghazali rahmatullah alayhi, he's got quite a lot of discussion here, but I'm going to run through very quickly. He says that too much joking causes laughter and it kills the heart. And it provokes malice because other people get offended. It removes dignity and honor. Yeah. Nabi Karim sallallahu alayhi wa sallam says, "Inna rajula yatakallam bil kalimati yadhaku bihi julasa'ahu." That person speaks something with which those people sitting around him might start laughing. فَيَحْمِي بِهَا أَبْعَدَ مِنَ الثُّرَيَّا. But then he's thrown more further away than the star of Socrates. And he's thrown very, very far away because of that. Not Socrates, it's the star of Suraya. And then another hadith, Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam says, "La tumari akhaka wa la tumazihhu." Don't argue with your brother and don't joke around with him too much because they can get offended. Yeah? So that's what he says. So he says a little bit's okay just to make the people happy, but don't make it a habit. Don't go overboard. Don't become the joker. Don't become the person that just goes around joking all day. And then the fifth thing he says is praising. Praising people. So the fifth element is praising as the habit of the people. And he gives a particular scenario. He says, as is the habit of the people and poets when visiting the venerated ones, people in high positions, they go there, back in the Middle Ages possibly. Even it happens now as well. You see people, community leaders, they like to go and praise the local MP and say things that aren't exactly true, etc., just to curry favor and gain some sort of advantage. So he says this is the habit of the storytellers and those who give speeches. They praise the wealthy who attend their gatherings. And he says that there's 6 things that are negative around this. 4 afflict the person who's being praised, and 2 afflict the person who's praising. The one who's praising, 4 afflict the person who's actually praising. So number 1, he goes overboard. He goes overboard in his praises. And when he goes overboard in his praise, he starts lying. And when he lies, that's a sin in itself. Number 2, he shows affection for someone when he knows it's not the case. Yeah, he's faking his affection for a person when he's praising them. So in reality, he's actually two-faced. Yeah, that's nifaq. So that's something that one should avoid. The third thing he says that is, Imam Ghazali says that he starts speculating. When he's praising, he's not seeing the truth, but he's speculating. And when you're speculating, then you come out with something that's not true. And then he mentions a hadith here. He says, وَيْحَكَ قَطَعْتَ عُنَكَ صَاحِبَكَ. Yeah? He says that the third thing is praising someone and speculating, right? And he mentions the hadith of the Nabi Karim sallallahu alayhi wasallam, in whose presence someone praised another person. He said, وَيْحَكَ. He said, destruction to you. قَطَعْتَ عُنَكَ صَاحِبِكَ. You have cut the throat or the neck of your companion. إِن كَانَ لَا بُدَّ مِن كَوْنِ أَحَدِكُمْ مَادِيًا أَخَاهُ فَلْيَقُلْ. If you want to praise your friend, then at the same time say أَحْسَبُ فُلَانٍ كَذَا وَلَا أُزَكِّي عَلَى اللَّهِ أَحَدٍ حَسِيبُهُ اللَّهُ إِن كَانَ يَرَى أَنَّهُ كَذَلِكَ. That means if you have to praise someone, then you should say in a diplomatic way. You should say that I think such a person is like this, but I'm not doing tazkiyah of anyone in particular. I'm not sure exactly what they're completely like. And then the fourth thing is that the person being praised becomes delighted. And it may be that he's an oppressor and he's therefore sinning by making him feel happy. So you praise somebody, but the person who you're praising, he's not worthy of this praise. But you're actually massaging his ego. And whilst you're massaging his ego, he's someone who's got a negative trait. And as you massage his ego, he's encouraged to carry on doing the negative stuff that he's doing. And in terms of the person being praised, well, there's 2 things that happen to him. Number 1, he becomes proud and he starts admiring himself. Ujub comes in, which is destructive. And number 2, he becomes happy with it. And he thinks that his actions are brilliant. He doesn't need to work any more hard beyond that. So then that's why Imam Ghazali rahmatullahi, he mentions that. So if a person is being praised, what do you do? If you're being praised, what should you do? Number 1, you should think about your khatimah. You should think about your last day. You should think about your end of life. Yeah? Think of your own sins. Somebody comes and praises you, don't let it massage your ego, but think about your sins. Think about, what am I going to do when I die? And what's my situation going to be in the eyes of Allah Almighty? Yeah? Think about your private life, because we've all got a private life. What happens behind closed doors? Skeletons in the cupboard. Yeah? Think about those negatives and bring yourself back down to earth. Because you're not as perfect as you look. And at the same time, the person who's being praised, he should think that he should dislike the praise and he should dislike it in his heart. And turn around and think to himself, you know what? I know what I'm really like. I know what's inside me. Come back to it. And come back to reality. Don't ride the waves of the praise, or don't ride the waves of other people's backs. Sayyidina Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu, whenever somebody used to praise him, he used to say, Allahumma gfirli ma la ya'lamun. Oh Allah, forgive me for that which they do not know. And about my own private life, they don't know what I'm really like. وَلَا تُؤَاخِذْنِي بِمَا يَقُولُونَ, and do not take me to task for that which they say. وَاجْعَلْنِي خَيْرًا مِمَّا يَظُنُّونَ, and make me better than they think. So Jazakallah khair, speakers, listeners. Sorry, I'm the speaker today. I've got another bayan for the 15th of Shaban, so I need to prepare for that. But so I'm all over the place a little bit today. But anyway, Jazakallah khair. Any questions regarding today? So the second lecture, the third lecture covered the second afat, or the second affliction affecting people, which is the tongue. And Imam Ghazali rahmatullah alayh, he mentions all the different things that affects a person negatively, and he mentioned 5 things: kidh, lying; ghibat, backbiting; umarat, argumentation; madh, praising; and joking, mizah. May Allah Almighty give us all the tawfiq to remove all of these sins and all of these negative afflictions from our heart. Yes, Brother Muhammad.
If someone is argumentative, how do we respectfully tell them not to be following these things?
Walk away.
What if they're your close friend and you don't want them to fall further in sin?
I'm sure you can get them in a right opportune moment and address that issue privately in a nice way, or you can just send the link to them for the recording. That might work, something like that. I think that should work. But you know, if someone's argumentative, just walk away. How much can you argue with people? That's the best thing. As soon as you see it, just walk away. Because people are just people. I hope, does that answer your question? Inshallah. Any other questions?
Regarding the arguments, if it is about deen, suppose a person is doing shirk, if he's into some haram things, is it permissible to go to have an argument with him as compared
What's
to
your intention?
intention? It depends upon the situation.
Is your intention to correct them? First of all, is your intention to correct them, or is your intention to get one over them and show your prowess in religious knowledge? So, then, you don't need to answer it. Yeah. If your intention is to show prowess, then your intention is incorrect. So just correct your intention first of all. Number 1. Number 2, the intention should be to show them what's right and show what's wrong. So are we speaking from a point of knowledge or not lack of knowledge? That's the second thing. And the third thing is, you make dua to Allah Almighty. You carry out pious action. You speak to them. You explain to them positively, not negatively, and then you move away and you praise Allah. You make dua for them. And if another opportunity comes, then you ask them again. But you know, just be careful. You don't become Mr. Preacher. But you're actually, you know, you're doing things in a constructive way. Because different people respond in a different way. If it's somebody on the street, you just walk up to them and start preaching to them, they won't like it. So maybe you might need to befriend them, get them under your wing, bring them close, and then guide them. That's one way of doing it. But it has to be done with wisdom. But there's a lot more debate, there's a lot more discussion to that than this.
One more thing is talking about lying. Is it permissible when it comes to saving someone's life? Can we lie?
So they're about to jump off a bridge. Yeah? And you're telling them that the whole world loves you? And don't worry about it? It's fine, yeah. Inshallah, it will be beneficial. I wouldn't go too deep into it. I'll just do what you need to do. Pull them over. Don't push them over. Yeah. Does that help?
Alhamdulillah.
Yeah. But you know, be economical. You know, there's a way of doing it. You use wisdom. Keep a check on yourself. Keep a check on yourself that you're not doing it. You know, sometimes you can say nice things to them in a way without being negative. Any questions, sisters? Yes, sister.
You know that lying into is permissible, which is one's might patch things over. What would be an example of that?
No, a person shouldn't do anything to harm themselves. Yeah, but you know, what they term as sometimes they might term it as a white lie. Does that make sense? Yeah, a white lie. You know,
Safed jute.
yeah,
Safed jute.
Sufed jute. Yeah. Something like, I suppose. I mean, it's difficult. I mean, why would you need to? I mean, ideally, you should have a relationship where you're actually, you know, open and honest, and nobody should be doing anything wrong. So the fact that, you know, he mentions that doesn't mean that it's a carte blanche to be naughty or to do wrong things or to do things that are contrary to what the relationship demands, etc., etc., etc. But I'll give you a classic example, one white lie. So like for example, mother-in-laws and daughter-in-laws scenarios, or wives and sister-in-laws, another classic one, yeah, and it can get very messy, yeah, it can get extremely messy. But just to patch things over a little bit, yeah, patch things over, because sometimes time heals. To patch things over, move on, draw a line, and if you were to effect that, that's positive. So, for example, there might be a situation where people might suspect another person of harboring ill intent or enmity against them. So then you might just say, oh, I had X say some really positive things about you. She really liked your dress. She really liked that cake you made on Eid Day. Yeah, and those type of kind words bring people together. Yeah, and I think she really liked I think she really liked your cake, or I think she really liked your cooking. So it patches things over, and then when there's a drive from one side to be better, or to patch up a relationship, then Allah, you have the right intention. Allah Ta'ala puts love between people, and He brings people together. So does that help a little bit? Yeah, but that doesn't mean, and this is very important. You see, it can't. It doesn't mean that a person can, if a man was to go around and he does all the wrong things and then he comes home and he says all the right things, yeah, just to save his own skin, that doesn't work like that. It doesn't work like that at all. It's about mending relationships in a positive way. And sometimes, a person might be doing everything correctly, yeah, but then the other side doesn't understand, or they've misunderstood it, or they've taken the negative meaning towards it. So then you go out of your way to mend that situation, because a lot of misunderstandings happen as well. To mend those relationships, you do something or say something in a positive way. Inshallah, that works. But I think these scenarios, sister, are like very few and far between, and you hardly should use them. Try and live lives where we're all living the correct life in the right way, so we don't have to use those. We don't have to revert back to those, or revert back to situations where we have to say a white lie, as they say. Sister, does that help in any way? Are you sure? Any questions?
Can we have an example of ghibbat of learning people from daily basis?
Ghibbat as in?
Learning people.
Learning. So that can you rephrase the question?
Example of ghibbat of learning people. You said at the very start, you were talking about ghibbat of learning people. How do we...
warning people.
Learning.
Oh, learning people, yeah. So Imam Ghazali rahmatullah alayhi, the thing about him is, he went through a spiritual crisis, and in his book, he addresses the ulama at times. So a lot of these spiritual crises, like the ulama and the learning people, they won't fall into, or the religious people. And when he talks about ulama, he's talking about all people who are religious, all consider themselves to be religious. He's not just talking about the Maulanas or the sheikhs or the muftis or the alims. He's talking about all religious people. So he says that he explains that there's novel ways of doing ghibbat. We consider ghibbat to be brother Abdullah there. Brother Abdullah, he's so ugly. Yeah, he's got bad breath, diesel breath. We think that's straightforward ghibbat. Black and white. There's no moving from the line. Proper, full whack, pure ghibbat. Yeah? But then there's other ways of doing ghibbat, where it's done with the garb of decency. Yeah? And they'll say, you might be sitting with your friend and say, Alhamdulillah, Allah saved me from being like Abdullah. Yeah? Bichara. Allah saved me. Oh, what's happened? Abdullah, he's working as a taxi driver and he's also signing on at the same time. Yeah? Astaghfirullah. He's getting benefits at the same time. Yeah? So we've garbed, or we've shrouded the ghibbat in We've got in religious language.
Classic way.
Yeah? Or you might just turn around and say, you might be sat there and you say, oh, Alhamdulillah. This is what Imam Ghazali said. Oh, Alhamdulillah, you know, at least I'm not in a situation like Abdullah. Yeah? So everyone turns around and says, well, what about Abdullah? Yeah? So he's instigating something there. Yeah? He's flicking something through. And there's no benefit in mentioning this because none of those people there are actually, it doesn't concern anybody there what Abdullah's doing. Yeah? It doesn't concern anybody there. What you're doing is ghibat. You're backbiting him. You're lowering his esteem in the eyes of people. And that's haram. So Imam Ghazali says that, you know, using these, you've got to watch out, not just for the straight black and white type of ghibat, but also the subtle ways of people doing ghibat. Watch out for that as well. Make sure you don't fall into those traps. That's what he's talking about there. Does that make sense, brother? This section is about 16 pages. Last section was about 3 pages. So summarizing it in 30 minutes is a bit difficult. Okay. Jazakallah khair, inshallah. Carry on next week.